Honorable Speaker, today we are going to start with stating what the problem today is in our society. The problem is that in a society where men has always been perceived to be the dominant character, we've always seen that men often take a gradual ownership of female companions. They often think that if they are in a relationship with someone, that they have a right over that person. It doesn't only have to be limited to men only, we agree, but that's the general scenario, and it can also be the alternative. So whoever is the dominant character in a relationship, be it the men or the female, they often take unacknowledged ownership of the person they're in a relationship with, and often that becomes a huge problem for those two individuals because they often cannot make proper informed decisions for themselves because they are obligated by emotional relationship to be bound to one another and listen to another person. We think that that is a huge problem in this society, and that is more prominent because when men are more likely to do it for females, and that is why it is a major concern for the feminist movement. So what is the basic idea of today, and why do we celebrate sugar babies? The reason we celebrate sugar babies is that not only sugar babies, every actor involved in this act, like sugar mommies, sugar daddies, sugar babies themselves, we think each and every one of the actors are something we hugely appreciate, and we think that is something advancing the feminist cause for us, and I'm going to show you why in a number of manners. First of all, I'm going to talk to you what is the essence of freedom in this scenario. Secondly, I'm going to talk to you about what is the nature of the personal relationship. And lastly, I'm going to talk to you about how this ultimately brings about empowerment for gender roles and eliminates a basic problem from the society. So how does it help in freedom, and how does it help for the feminist cause? We think that when you are in a relationship where you are getting financial assistance or there is a contractual basis to it, we think that that's when you are not completely emotionally attached to it. You have a quantification, you have an idea of how much you're going to pay for it or how much is involved. You have a quantifiable cost analysis in your head as to what you're stepping into and whether you can step out of it. We think that is when options open up for you to step out of it if you don't like it and the financial assistance stops, or the financial assistance starts if you want to start something new. But at the same time, the way that you're in a relationship with another person comes to a quantifiable measure. How does it free? Before I move on, yes.
Ma'am, I put it to you that relationships are very subjective. The emotions you experience in relationships are very subjective. You might find an attachment throughout the relationship after the relationship has gone on for some time.
Even if relationships are too subjective, we think that we should bring an objectifiable measure to it in order to have a better verification of what the relationship ultimately has the ends to, right? So going on to how does it free the feminists or free the females, we think that ultimately it's about how much control you have over your body, how much control you have over your emotions, how much do you want to give out to the person you're in a relationship. We think that ultimately this is all about freedom. It's not only about who has a right over your body, it's also about who has a right over your personality or your ideas and your thoughts and how it's being processed. We think when it comes to a quantifiable measure, when you can choose your partner and opt out of it because of the financial exchanges that is taking place in it, we think that's when autonomy is best established, because that's the essence of freedom, and that's when you're always thinking and quantifying it in a proper manner, and you're always putting yourself over another individual, and that is the best self-preservation, that is the best self-actualization we can ever opt for in this society. We think the feminists have a high cost in terms of trying to get that kind of self-actualization within the female, so that they understand that their emotions are not supposed to be donated out to people, but rather to be kept for themselves and for their own protection mostly. So going on to the second concept of how do we think personal relationships are. We think that personal relationships do not have to be bound simply on subjective emotional terms, because the way personal relationships build you as an individual is not on simply that whether you are with another person. It gives you the idea of how you sustain in a society. It gives you an idea of who will support you in the society. And we think that when you can bring it to quantifiable cost and analysis term, it's highly beneficial for us, because we don't think that anything has to be long lasting. Anything has to be always stable and always has to be together. You don't have to be in a like marriage, the concept of marriage, right? You always have to be together till the end of the day. We think that is something which is just prehistoric now. It's something we should not opt for. We should always have a terminating period if you want to, and that is the concept we want to. The reason we think that then going on to the idea of empowerment, which is the basic major idea here. So we think that the basic idea that we have sugar mommies along with sugar daddies is that sugar mommies can also make male companions and give them financial assistance for it. We think that the idea is for both the genders here, and none of the genders should be giving up any part of their connections or emotional aspect to these people without having a financial compensation for it. We think that it's highly important for us to understand that women in the society be given the power to have that kind of grasp over, to be involved in this kind of exchanges as well, just like male counterparts have been doing so for a very long time without having to go through the exchange altogether. We think that when both the ideas come together, it's highly empowering for the feminist ideology, because the idea of equality, which has been the second wave feminism all about, being the idea of equality is best answered here. It's not about superiority, it's not about being below another, it's about every sex having the same kind of autonomy and legitimacy and the same kind of financial right over another individual whenever you're coming to that coming to that connection. Yes, sir.
Now, basically, equality or going against dominance is you have your own autonomy, but in this case, you're selling your autonomy to the other people. That in itself is not equal to the other people.
We think that that is not selling to anyone. We think that when somebody is coming to you without your consent or just trying to emotionally sensitize you towards that individual, and that's why you're in a relationship, that is not something which is always free consent, or that is not something which is always a clear basis of what relationship you're into. But when a monetary exchange is involved in it, the person who is also giving out the product has as much of a control in terms of deciding whether he or she wants to be paid that much in terms of being in that relationship, or whether a higher pay would be of a greater satisfaction or would be a greater worth for their own product. Even if this does seem like a novel concept to most of the people in this house, it's something we have to understand, that even if it's a subjective concept, we should be able to quantify it in terms of how much do we think we are worth and how much will we be able to give up. So if the personal relationship is something like we will just sit with you and talk with you during your office break, that's the amount of relationship you're going to get from me, and that's the amount you have to pay me for. So it depends on how much you can pay me, that how much I'm willing to give up in terms of my own emotions and my own personal connections with you, right? So we think that ultimately what side opening government wants is empowerment, in the sense that we do not want to just give up our emotions for nothing. I beg to propose.
Alright, thank you so much. Now I'd like to invite the leader of opposition.
Madam Chair, side opposition always support individuals' right to self-actualize and their right to bodily autonomy. But we think when it comes to expand that this right and also bodily autonomy is given to the extent and is given due to undue influence, things like money, ladies and gentlemen, we think that it is at best not a form of empowerment towards the women, but a form of objectification, knowing the fact that they are preying on your vulnerability, on your need of money, ladies and gentlemen, to conquer and to have domination towards your body. That we think is very problematic coming from self-opening government. But obviously, ladies and gentlemen, this debate revolves around liberal democracy, and we think in this particular situation, ladies and gentlemen, there should be a distinction between an endorsement from feminist movement and also individuals' choice within this sense, ladies and gentlemen. We don't think that it's strategic for feminist movement to claim themselves to fight over male domination, but then again, ladies and gentlemen, are okay with male domination plus money, ladies and gentlemen. We don't think that money should be an ultimate change for this particular stance of feminist movement, ladies and gentlemen. But secondly, we don't think that this kind of situation, ladies and gentlemen, also in line with the principles of feminist movement, ladies and gentlemen, where we are fighting for equality. Therefore, we're not okay with the idea of domination coming from side of opening government. Before I move on to my speech, where I will talk about three things. Number one, on what is the real problem with the sugar babies. Secondly, on the harms of celebration of feminist movement, on the idea of endorsement, and lastly, on how it will harms the idea of relationship in totality, ladies and gentlemen, and how it will create a bad social behavior in terms of society understanding what is a real relationship, ladies and gentlemen. Firstly, couple rebuttals to the side of opening government. Number one, they talked about that this kind of transaction is happened under contract and people can opt out. False. Two reasons why. Number one, ladies and gentlemen, we tell you that the idea of these sugar babies receiving money, ladies and gentlemen, is an incentive for these people to not opt out from this particular situation, ladies and gentlemen, because they need the money. They need the money to buy books. They need the money in order for them to sustain their daily life, ladies and gentlemen. Because we need to consider these people who are involved in this particular situation, ladies and gentlemen, are the poor people, especially the girls who want to get their education in college, ladies and gentlemen. These are the kinds of people who are involved in the particular situation. Knowing the fact that they need this money from this sugar daddies, ladies and gentlemen, this is enough incentive for them to be in this particular relationship, and it's not an opt-out situation, ladies and gentlemen. Even if these people, ladies and gentlemen, can opt out within this particular situation, we think that the fact that these people, these women, and so this man, is already exposed to this kind of situation, ladies and gentlemen, is also worse for them, especially in terms of them sexualizing themselves and them defining their identity within that particular society. We think that exploration of identity is harmful under their side of the house, where they allow this kind of transaction of bodily autonomy towards money to become a legitimate option, ladies and gentlemen. This is something that will not endorse inside of opposition. But secondly, she also talked about the idea of freedom of individualism, freedom of individual. Number one, I don't think that this is true, because Mama has already POI to you that this is an action of you selling your autonomy towards other people, ladies and gentlemen, who are richer than you, ladies, who have power over you. Therefore, there is something that is not in line with the principles of feminist movement. But secondly, she also never acknowledged the fact that this kind of transaction, this kind of work, ladies and gentlemen, isn't your body, isn't a product that you can just stop whatever things that might go out within that particular transaction, but it is a service base. Meaning that, ladies and gentlemen, if your partner, if your sugar daddy doesn't feel like you're giving something which is up to the par of the money that he gave to you, ladies and gentlemen, this is something that will create problem within this transaction, ladies and gentlemen, where it is subjective for you to begin with to determine where is right and where is wrong within this situation. Sit down. Lastly, on the idea of empowerment, ladies and gentlemen, we abhor this very characterization, saying that empowerment will come to an expense of you selling your bodily autonomy, ladies and gentlemen, where we don't think the idea of you being called as a man whore or slut within your campus, ladies and gentlemen, is something which is tantamount towards empowerment of you as an individual. Before I move on to my argument, go.
So, do you think that when the feminist movement acknowledge and support the sugar baby, do you think that will counter the stereotype against them?
Firstly, you need to show that there's a trend within the society of accepting the idea of people being sugar babies towards sugar daddy or sugar mommy, because you cannot just simply say, oh, just because feminist movement endorsing it, therefore society will not frown upon to this particular situation, ladies and gentlemen, because sex is something which is taboo and society will always frown upon. Doesn't matter that you in a liberal society, ladies and gentlemen, that you accept and endorse it as a view of feminist movement. First argument, what's the problem with the sugar baby, ladies and gentlemen? Have already told you on these people who are involved is the poor people and also the students, and these people are under influence. But also, this is very important for you to be taken to your consideration, is that this kind of action you involved in this particular transaction, ladies and gentlemen, harms your future, especially when you want to opt into a certain form of employment, ladies and gentlemen. Your boss will do your boss and also your future companion, your future mate, ladies and gentlemen, will do a background checkup on your past, ladies and gentlemen, because this is something which is already happening in the context of liberal society, ladies and gentlemen, where these bosses will eventually do a checkup on the past thing that these people have done in their colleges. If you are caught to be sugar babies of that particular sugar daddies or sugar mummies, ladies and gentlemen, you will obviously start in the wrong foot within that with your future employer, ladies and gentlemen. This harms your actualization post-college, ladies and gentlemen. Secondly, the idea of celebration or endorsement is a form of objectification of women. Women will be seen under their side as chattels or movable objects, ladies and gentlemen. And this regresses the feminist movement and sends the message that you selling your body autonomy is a legitimate way for you to self-actualize. But secondly, let's look at the victim and also the lowest common denominator. You shift the victim narrative, ladies and gentlemen, that is needed in this particular situation. We think that the victim narrative of these people, ladies and gentlemen, should be remain within the status quo, and we don't want it to be seen as something which is normalized by society. We tell you, ladies and gentlemen, that a domination towards your body still happen, and we don't want it to be normalized within the particular society. We draw a parallel to the beauty pageant, ladies and gentlemen, where you create a superficial society that appreciates superficials, also externalities, ladies and gentlemen. This is when you limit the choice and only beautiful people can obtain within this particular situation. With all those reasons, ladies and gentlemen, obviously takes the debate.
Alright, thank you so much. Now I'd like to move on to the DPN.
Madam Speaker, 4 things in my speech. First of all, I shall tell you why this is not any form of oppression. Second, I shall tell you why this positive characterization of an intersexual relationship is missing, and the lacuna in the feminist discourse that should be filled. Thirdly, I shall tell you why the quantification ability of money is important here. And finally, I shall tell you why the desanctification of intersexual relationship is a good thing. Let's talk about the opposition's case. They keep on harping how this is essentially another form of objectification, lack of autonomy. Need me point out that you already enjoy autonomy when you choose to participate in that relationship. So it's not a false choice that you can you have to become a sugar baby, right? If you don't have money, you can go work somewhere. You can be a clerk, you can go work in the restaurant. There is a positive choice out of a plethora of reasonable options which you can take. So therefore, we don't think that just because they don't have money means they have to take a choice. Just because they have to take a choice, this is the only choice and this is oppressive. Furthermore, we don't think this choice is inherently oppressive. The difference between prostitution, which is what opening opposition has been arguing about, and sugar daddy and sugar mommy relationship is that you can choose in the latter case to escalate or to de-escalate based on the price you paid. So it's really same as the time, which for example our opening has already told you that you spend with the person. What are actions? Flowers, restaurants, dinners, all the rest of that. There's a catalog, ladies and gentlemen, however appalling that may sound, is not very. At the end of the day, the list of actions which you can choose to participate are all enumerated. So we don't think it is all out of your control. We think you have all the control in the world to control. Finally, objectification. First of all, why is it necessary that objectification is bad? We told you people can choose to objectify themselves if the ends are according to the means. We think that prostitutes should be able to allow to prostitute themselves for money. We think that at the end of the day, we think that when you have to take into account that these are also interpersonal relationships that we're talking about, not just purely sexual relationships. For example, having dinner with that rich guy or that rich woman. All the rest of that means that these are not tangible things that you can just objectify in a form. So we think in form and in practical that argument falls. Let's talk about why the positive discourse or the positive feeling of this lacuna feminist discourse is actually quite important. Because at the end of the day, we think that feminism has been talking about not getting abused by men for too long, right? At the end of the day, the definition of what is acceptable as women's behavior has been defined according to what you're not supposed to do. For example, rendered into oppressed positions. At the end of the day, when a woman, for example, a feminist or someone who aspires to become feminist goes into a relationship, she has a very fluffy notion that she should achieve her own good out of that relationship. And that is the state of feminism right now, that it should be about the women and it should be about the good of the women. But how are we going to do that, and what exactly does that mean, is completely missing out of 40 years of feminist discourse. We provide first of all, a positive contribution to that, in that we give a definite idea of what it is that is acceptable as a feminist acceptance of what it is of interpersonal relationship, not just a sexual relationship, but how you can interact with a man woman in during a relationship. That is important.
Sir?
Second thing that's important is how it is quantifiable. Because we think at the end of the day that the patriarchal oppression occurs through power relationship exerted through emotions, right? Through a dequantification and through essentially a blurring of all the lines in the woman's mind or in the man's mind, because we're also talking about sugar mommy. So at the end of the day, this sort of blurring in sort of the immersive relationship which you're engaged in when you are in a relationship to that person makes you much more susceptible to that influence than to other types of discourse, right? So therefore we think that in order for a positive contribution to even rectify that situation, it has to be also be quantifiable. That it has to say that it is okay for you to think of your relationship in quantities. That's okay for you to think that money should be account in how much I'm willing to pay for example, having dinner or all the rest of that with you, right? So we think that that sort of commitment can now be quantified and can be viewed objectively and rationally by women instead of being rendered into all sorts of emotional and all sorts emotional and physical even aggression and blackmail that is inherent in a relationship right now. Closing. Any points?
Now, basically, when you
No, thank you. Fourthly, why is it that this desanctifies relationship between two sexes, and why is that good? First of all, we think that there is currently a sanctity between the male and female relationship in the society, such that there is, for example, lots of ads saying that you are a man and on Valentine's Day you should do that and do that, right? At the end of the day, we think that this essentially means that women and men both prioritize their gendered identity above everything else. That at the end of the day, my most important attribute is how I'm going to interact with a girl, for example. These things are harmful, and we think to de-escalate that, we should actually put a price on it. So at the end of the day, when you say this is also another form of social interaction that can be quantified, that in itself decreases the sanctity. Any point at 6 minutes? Yes.
So what your whole case is about bodily autonomy, that is an action or choice of an individual. Now tell me, what's your principal justification of feminist movement, and how feminist movement, why should they endorse this kind of transaction?
So we've quite outlined clearly in the opening that our feminist principle is that we allow that women should have the maximum autonomy. More specifically, we think that there should be a more definite answer on feminist discourse as to regarding what is acceptable as a sort of return instead of being subjugated through patriarchal power structures. You should listen to our speeches. At the end of the day, this desanctification serves to render and to lessen the importance on that sort of identity, so that it's also just another form of social identity, just another form of employment, for example. Now you can just get money from your boss, the same as you can get money from the sugar daddy. We think that's quite important because at the end of the day, we don't want people to see themselves as gendered individuals. We want people to have more access to other attributes. We want people to have more freedom towards accessing non-gendered or other gendered attributes and identity characteristics, and we think that fosters mobility as long as they're not cocooned in that shape. At the end of the day, we think this is fair. We think that both men and women can do it. We think this is not oppression. We're very proud to propose.
Alright, thank you. I'd like to have the Deputy Leader of Opposition here.
Equality is not actually picking a side of between two parties, not picking an easy way out from an opponent that doesn't have a question during a POI in the first place. Bite the bullet and see what they have told you right now. They told you that they want feminism that is against so-called dominance, that do not want to enforce patriarchy. But what have they told you? Yes, I have found self-actualization in my identity by selling myself to be dominated by another person. That in itself is you being dominant. that in itself enforces the idea of patriarchy, that there are someone that is above you. That in itself shows that you can be bought by any single time. And I'll tell you how it further harms a person's perception within the future. What they told you today, they told you that simply because you make a choice, that you cannot be condemned for it. Fine, yes, they make a choice. We can respect that choice. But what is the stand of a feminism? As a feminist, you need to understand you are against the idea of patriarchy, you are against the idea of dominance. We can respect their choice to be a sugar baby, we can respect their choice to get money however they want, but we do not intend to celebrate that choice because we are fairly against the idea of dominance in itself. Being a sugar baby is being dominated by another person, and that in itself is against the idea of feminism. That's why we don't celebrate their choice. We can actually say you can do whatever you want, we can respect your body autonomy, but we do not believe that you choosing to be dominated by another party is the right thing and something that a feminist should celebrate on in today's society. And also we believe that's not the kind of identity you want to propagate in today's society as well. What else have they told you today? They told you that this is a freedom for you. This is a nature and an empowerment because simply everybody plays a role. We believe that in itself, that empowerment, that there is sugar mommy, there is sugar baby, there's a man, there is a female, and there's also sugar daddy. All these four people play a role does not actually mean true, because these four people play a different role where other people have a bigger role they play over the other. Even considered by the opening line by the Prime Minister that they are dependent on the money, that their choice and their action also is affected by the sugar daddy. That in itself also proves that they are being dominated, they are being controlled to a certain extent by the sugar daddy and the sugar mummy. That in itself should not be celebrated by feminism in any form and way. Before I move on to my substantive, yes.
So, do you believe that our employee and employee relationship involves dominance and oppression?
Yeah, but you work for it. You don't get free money by, selling yourself. You actually work to get that money. That is totally another idea of the debate, not basically what we talk about right now. Now, what I'll tell you today that I'll extend the idea that this objectification of women also doesn't reflect what the feminism want in society, whereby both within the political cause and within the social cause. And within the future, it affects and harm how the relationship works, and yes, for a better POI.
So you are in for working to get money, and that's not dominance. So what is the moral difference between me choosing to commit my emotions and time to a certain people and me choosing to commit my emotion and time to a certain paper or work?
Okay, one, again, it's not the debate. Second, you do work. You don't go to dinner in expect of sexual relationship. You actually contribute, work, and be a productive part of society. Government pays you to be a productive part of society, not people paying you for them to be your sexual dog. There's a difference within that, and we do not believe that we actually celebrate the idea of dominance within you being a sexual dog. Now, let's see what we told you today. That you need to understand this monetary incentive in itself is a form of how they would want to say like work or subjugation. We believe that in itself is strong towards the idea of feminism, because within the political cause you need to understand that feminism is against dominance in essence, irrespective of what happens, that there needs to be an equal treatment between men and women. But what happens right now is that there is a patriarchal society and an enforcement of idea that there are people that can be dominated through being sugar daddy or sugar mummy, or within their say selling your dignity for a certain price, so to speak, whatever that they want to put it. But let's look on the other side where you need to consider social cost. Now, in the social cost aspect is that you create an accepted trend of what can be considered a relationship, of what can be considered a sugar daddy and a sugar mummy to be an acceptable relationship. We do not believe this because you engineer the young people to quantify their dignity and their worth to a bigger picture and to a better party in today's society. And also affects when they grow up that not necessarily they will be the sugar mummy or the sugar daddy, but they quantify themselves, their dignity and their worth to the public at large. May it be being a prostitution or even within marriage that they quantify their dignity and their worth. And we believe that's not the kind of perception and mindset that we want to have. But when you think about feminism as a whole, when it's against dominance, when it's not something just because you believe it's so, when it's all about equal treatment, we do not believe a political trend that says there is a dominance, an accepted political trend saying that there can be a dominance within men, or there's a social trend saying that you can be bought by money, is a good idea to progress your movement as when you wanted to be treated equally. When you wanted to be treated equally, you do not want any kind of patriarchal trend or accepted trend by the society saying that you can be dominated, saying that your dignity has a worth, that you can be bought. Those are the kind of ideology that is against feminism trend as a whole. But that's why we believe feminism should not take a stance saying that, oh, we celebrate the sugar daddy and sugar mommy, because that in itself shows the idea of dominance for other people. Irrespective of presence of money or not, the dominance idea is going to be entrenched within the society, and that dominance idea will be harder for feminists to push forward their ideology. When you want to push forward the idea, feminists push forward the ideology of being equal treatment, there will be no dominance. One of the things that they will fight for is against being bought by money, for instance with sugar daddy and sugar mommy. When part of harming future relationship is that you create a certain ideal within the young society mindset of how a relationship should be. Within their case is that you can always be bought by money, that you can always sell yourself by a certain amount. We do not believe that it is true. Let's say that, for instance, what they want to talk about work is that you pay for the amount of work you do, but not just because, yes, I choose to sell myself for 100 ringgit, it's justified to sell yourself for 100 ringgit. That in itself still shows that it's a concept of dominance in itself, that you degrade yourself as a human, and we believe feminism that is against dominance and is fighting for equal treatment is not supposed to support that kind of ideology. With that, we are gladly opposing the motion.
Alright, thank you very much. That concludes the open for this debate. Now I'd like to invite the member of government to speak.
OG wanted to quantify relationships, and they wanted to tell you that it's not just about sexual gratification. We'll bite the bullet. We'll say that even if it's sexual gratification, it's still okay. CG will compartmentalize this debate. What will I tell you? I'll tell you three things. I'll tell you, number one, why the right to self-identification, to self-determination is not just important in terms of sexual liberty, but it's also the very right of that woman to define that relationship however she wants. Number two, I'll tell you why feminists specifically should support sugar babies, and why it would be strategic in the long run. And number three, I'll tell you how it's actually a form of networking, which could lead to the women fighting for causes or climbing out of the social ladder. Before that, right, a few rebuttals. Now, this problem coming from the opposition side is the idea that if you are financially dependent on a man, you are necessarily the weaker sex. This is the kind of rhetoric women would want to change, because that is not necessarily the rhetoric that we put on ourselves. That is the rhetoric that men and sexually conservative individuals placed on women or imposed onto women, that discriminates them, that marginalizes them in such a way that women do not want to be known as, right? Because we feel that even you connoting it as selling yourself is an actual term structurally engineered by men or sexually conservative individuals who do not go through those experiences enough to know exactly what kind of benefits or to know exactly what kind of things that women can actually have coming out of these relationships, right? Also, the opposition side wanted to fight this rhetoric that you can't sell yourself, or you can't sell your autonomy, but you don't want to talk about it. You label it as a taboo and you leave it as such. If individuals feel there is a benefit that they can accrue from this relationship and they're willing to talk about it, the kind of discussion never takes place under your paradigm, because they will further be marginalized, or they will automatically be targeted as sexually liberal women, or sexually women who are too sexually active or too sexual in nature for society to listen to. You're legitimizing that taboo, and you're legitimizing the stigma against them. You're not doing anything to fight for them. That victim narrative that you so desperately want to eliminate from society will be reinforced, because individuals will never have a say or have a medium to say that's not necessarily the case, because they will automatically be shut down. The victim narrative is reinforced, and you, by condemning these individuals, will not do anything to change that. OO went on further to say, look, in the same way that we don't want women to be in beauty pageants, we don't want women to be in relationships where they have to be financially dependent on the men. We don't think that you condemning individuals individuals who are also beautiful, like in beauty pageants, is necessarily a good thing. Suddenly, these women are automatically superficial when that's not necessarily the case. There are values to them that can be accrued, or like there are certain benefits or individual, individualistic kind of ideals that these women can offer that you are not giving a chance to be heard, right? Sid, let me move on to my first substantive. This is where CG will win. CG feels that it's not just about you sexually determining yourself or you actually wanting to change this rhetoric, but it's about you taking the matter into your own hands and redefining the role itself. Because a lot of individuals think that you are necessarily weak if you are financially important. That's not true. By that definition, housewives who depend on their husband for long years of period, like my mother who spent 30 years being a housewife, would not ever have a chance to feel empowered. When that's not necessarily the case. My mother, individuals, moms, wives, right? They find empowerment in knowing that they can build a household. In the same way, right, women can feel empowered knowing that they can actually find someone who is willing to dedicate their whole lives to freaking spend on them. For a lot of women, they see that as a form of benefit. They see that as a form of empowerment. To have a man that is willing to do that, right? In the same way that we feel that should be also a benefit for men who have sugar mamas, right? But how else are you redefining the stigma? Because you are also allowed to sexually define yourself or define your sexual liberty however you want. We have feminist groups fighting for sexual liberty, and we think this is an extension of that principle, given the fact that women can choose to have autonomy and can choose to use that autonomy however they like. You setting a standard on how they should choose to use the autonomy is you setting a standard for those women. We think you are defining those women based on your standards, and what you're doing is you're basically wanting them to subjugate to those ideals as opposed to them being allowed to identify themselves however they want. No, Sid. There are a plethora of definitions you can choose to accrue benefits from as a feminist. You can be a cultural feminist, you can be an extremely conservative feminist, you can also be an extremely liberal feminist, right? In the same way that you want to, in the same way that these women could also identify themselves. But on the second level, we think it's important for these relationships itself to be redefined. Like women or men who necessarily have partners they financially depend on does not mean that they are necessarily weak. And even if they have to depend on their partners, it does not necessarily mean that they are incapable of doing anything else. They can have autonomy in other forms of say in their relationships, right? It's not as if it's completely non-existent. What you're doing is you're not only gender fixating, but you're also fixating the type of relationship you want these women to be in. We want individuals, especially women, to be able to say they can identify not only their sexual liberty, but how they want their relationships to be defined. Before I move on, opening.
Knowing that these individuals are underage age and still in formative years or even in identity searching, what is your paradigm? Why is your paradigm be beneficial in terms of them sexualizing themselves, especially when those individuals prey on their vulnerability of them needing money? Why is that more important rather than the feminist movement taking action?
Thank you. We're always taking it to an extreme level where minors get into the relationships, right? We don't think we support them. But even if the regulations, even if that's the case, regulations can continue to exist. We will continue to punish pedophiles who target individual women. But at the same time, we want individuals to feel like if they are at an age where they can give consent, why is it necessarily harmful for them? You have not characterized that. You have not dealt with that. Let's move on to my second issue, why it's necessarily strategic for feminists to support sugar babies. On the first idea, we think that there's already been a huge progression in terms of how feminists think of sexuality. With groups like Femin or like with sexual liberty groups that are fighting for these causes, we think that for feminism as a whole entity should celebrate these kinds of ideals, because at the end of the day, you want to champion choice and you want to champion individualism. But on the second level, why is this necessarily important? Because if you look at the spectrum of how feminist groups have to operate now, a lot of them, like Femin, like I mentioned, right, have to resort to radical means just to get their word across. We feel that when the feminist groups as a whole collectively say, look, you have to listen to this because there is a legitimate cause behind this, we feel that there's no need for this. We feel that there's a likelihood that there's no need for radical feminist groups to have to resort to radical means to get their word across, because there is a moderate form of expression now. Because feminist groups as a whole will collectively want to be palatable to society, so they wouldn't have to, strip off topless in front of churches or resort to radical means when there is already a platform where feminist groups would want to promote, right? That's why it would be strategic, because feminist groups cannot control that narrative, as opposed to you identifying it as necessarily radical straight away. You can control that narrative when feminist groups collectively have a say in it. But number three, that's on the last idea, right? How is this important for networking? We think in polygamy, like in terms of sister wives, polygamy, women are actually given empowerment because they have that social aspect for them to climb up the social ladder. They have some form of position of influence, or they are given the economic means. When they are given that economic means, right, they are able to fight for certain causes that certain women who are not in those kind of positions are not able to fight for. We think it's important because it's not necessarily financially beneficial, but you can also climb out of the social ladder that you so desperately think needs some fixing. Go with site CG.
Alright, thank you so much. Now I'd like to have the member of opposition.
Madam Speaker, I'll be honest with you, I'm currently quite lost. Because 5 speakers have come up to you and spoke to you, but they have yet to clarify what feminism is all about. So let me just put it out there. Feminism is the ideal that both sexes are equal, no matter in economic, in social, or in any other aspect. It is not just against patriarchy or the idea that males are dominant over females. It's also against the idea that females are not and should not be dominant over males either. It's the idea that both genders are equal. So now let me move on to some of the substantives given by side government, some of it which were rather contradictory. So firstly, on the idea that it is not objectification of women by quantifying this companionship from side opposition and from opening and from closing. They mentioned this about it's a form of networking on how you can actually progress up the social ladder. We say that this in itself is an objectification of women, and we are actually trading the services of these women for monetary gains. And the second thing to note, important thing to note is that more often than not, it is a sugar daddy raising a female sugar baby, and that's why we are going to focus more on this in my current speech. So, secondly, on the fact that women are given the power to exchange companionship for money, and how that actually propagates the feminism ideal. I have no idea what that means. But the fact is that the world runs on money. So whoever controls the money will actually control the relationship. And this is actually why there's this drive towards economic independence of females from the feminism movement. They're actually promoting education. They're promoting equal job opportunities. They're promoting equal career prospects for women, just because that they can be economically dependent, and they do not economically independent, so that they do not need to depend on anyone for economic sustenance, be it a sugar daddy or their husbands. Before I move on to my substantives, yes, close it, opening.
Sir, what is the problem in that I'll just take some money and I'll have dinner with this person? Is it very, very repulsive to you, or is it very, very dehumanizing to you? What's that difference between me doing that and me doing computer work? All of us get free money.
Okay, it's a bit of both actually. So this moves on to my first point, how it cheapens the relationship. We state that the companionship, the relationship between a female and a male, it is meant to be an end where you enjoy it, not as a means to actually generate money and to generate whatever benefits or social climbing up the social ladder or whatever side government wants to portray.
Exactly.
We say that this is meant by actually placing a financial by actually sugar babies gaining financial benefits from this relationship. We're actually cheapening the relationship. This is because relationships are meant you're meant to derive stability psychologically from it, and between both partners they're supposed to support each other and be interdependent, and that's why we as feminists, we would like to we deeply regret these sugar babies. This is because we believe that both sexes are equal, and they should not be no sex should be dominant over the other. And now I'll move on to my extension, which is the psychological damage of the sugar baby. This is because I have told you that whoever controls the money in the relationship controls the relationship itself. This is because the world runs out of money. So this creates a dependence on the sugar parent financially. And this propagates the idea that one gender is more financially capable than the other. So what side government is effectively saying that is that women are they do not have the same equal means to generate as much money as a male would, and that's why they actually outsource this money generation by actually providing companionship to the sugar daddy or sugar mommy. So this is because one person is allowed to stay at home while the other works, and as I keep emphasizing, it's about the equality of the sexes. So by celebrating the rise of sugar babies, we are pushing for the acceptance of the economic dominance of one gender over the other, and this is what we really do not want to see. Now, secondly, on the idea that it cheapens body work, we also believe that as feminists, we believe that there is intrinsic value in the body, and not just the female body, but the male body per se. And by actually encouraging this sugar baby, we are actually placing a value on the body, and it raised the idea that these sugar babies, they are submissive towards the sugar parent. Before that, yes. Any from closing?
If objectification occurs when there's no consent from the woman, if the woman does consent, why are you invalidating that?
Yeah. This is because the idea, as I have mentioned, is this the body autonomy is not meant as a means to gain money. It is an end in itself. And furthermore, by exerting this male dominance over females, as in the classic case of a sugar daddy and a sugar baby, we are actually ingraining this inferiority complex in females, whereby they expect to be raised and expect to be fed by sugar daddies. And this is what we don't want, because as I keep mentioning over and over again, feminism is actually the social, the economic, and in all aspects, equality of the sexes. And we really regret that in any circumstance, one gender should take precedence over the other. So we believe that the burden of financial support should fall equally on both genders, because both genders are equally financially equally capable to work to generate money in the career. And by discouraging sugar babies, we hope to actually push the notion that both genders are equal, and we really do not want to see this in the future. Thank you.
Alright, thank you so much. Now I'd like to invite the last speaker of the golf bench to go forward again.
Yeah.
Okay. Right. Madam Chair, closing government believes that feminist movement should celebrate all kind of feminism, and feminist movement particularly should not put a single definition as to how a proper woman should live her life. We think that even under status quo, the feminist movement have widened their definition of feminism. For example, they have been supporting the nudist movement, even though a lot of people are saying that these nudists are objectifying themselves. But when these women who are involved in the nudist movement believe that by sexually objectifying themselves, they feel empowered within their own skin, we think that the feminist movement should support that kind of sexual liberty as well. Even if, under status quo, even if we were to go under their contextualization as to how this woman, being a sugar baby, is being sexually submissive to men, if we think that the woman can accrue any kind of sexual or financial benefit out of that relationship, we think that the feminist movement should also support that kind of life choice. No, thank you. Within my speech, I'll have 3 issues to be solved. Firstly, why the feminist movement needs to endorse sugar babies to begin with. Secondly, is being a sugar baby empowering? Thirdly, what's the harm of not supporting or endorsing the sugar babies? Firstly, why the feminist movement needs to endorse sugar babies. On the first level, is it really against the principle of feminism? The idea of the whole bench from oppositions here today, they have to come to a concession by saying that exchanging dignity for money is not in line. Wait a minute, is not in line with feminism. Well, we have to understand why one become a sugar baby to begin with. It might be because of financial benefit, or it might be because of emotional reasons, right? We think that regardless, if a woman thinks that a relationship can give benefit in whatever way, that's enough of a reason for the feminist movement to respect and to support the life choices that this woman made. And secondly, we think that it's very important for the feminist movement to highlight this matter, because it's the responsibility of this woman to protect, of this feminist movement to protect all kind of women. Because you have to understand, if we continue to disregard this issue, the sugar babies will be continued to be further discriminated and marginalized by the society. Therefore, we think that that's the importance of the feminist movement to address this issue and to include the sugar baby, the act of the sugar baby as exercising their bodily autonomy the same as everyone else's in the relationship. Therefore, we think that when this happens, you will lead to further discourse. Therefore, at the end of the day, you will help to widen the definition of feminism and change the stereotype of the society against the sugar baby. Further, we think that by that we will increase the feminist movement will increase the critical mass of the support from the people on the ground to the movement. And we think that by not having one narrative and one definition as to how a woman should behave, this kind of woman will be less likely to be radical in order to get the attention of the people, in order to get attention of the people and to generate discourse. Therefore, this is the importance of feminist movement highlighting this issue as of today. Yes.
In extension, you talked about the needs to moderate and also to galvanize feminists. How is setting your autonomy and actualizing via sex unradical? But secondly, how would you reconcile the moderates and also the conservative they are within these feminist groups?
We don't understand how they're defining this woman, defining this woman being under that kind of relationship as being radical, because we think that that's Bunny's extension came into play, right? Because we think that by us having the feminist movement to publicly endorsing and publicly supporting this kind of woman, that is when this woman does not feel the need to be radical, for example, to be naked in the public and to interrupt public harmony, right? Because we are giving enough attention to this kind of woman. No, thank you. Secondly, is being a sugar baby empowering? The only argument against it being empowering is because these women are paid. Therefore, they tend to be dependent upon the men. We reject that sort of characterization, because you have to understand that the type of women that are chosen to become sugar babies to begin with, they're not women of the streets that these politicians or the CEOs, people who are rich and with influence, would choose to become their sugar babies. The woman must have a certain status within the society, social status, right? For them to be chosen to become sugar babies to begin with. It's not that they cannot support their own life. It's only an informed choice. They think that it's easier and it's more beneficial for them to become sugar babies. Therefore, we think that we should respect that. And we think that because of the fact that the kind of people who can usually afford sugar babies, i.e. people who are rich and people who are influential, i.e. politicians or CEOs, right? We think that because of the fact that sugar babies have a very soft spot within the heart of the sugar daddies, right? We think that they might be able to influence decision making. For example, influence policies which can push the feminist ideas and other feminist matters. Now, on second point, on the issue of going on to the third issue of what's the harm of not supporting or endorsing the sugar babies. Under their paradigm, Madam Chair, these sugar babies will be further marginalized, and the stereotype against them will be further entrenched. And they did not give us any kind of alternative as to how they plan to protect this kind of woman. And we think that this woman will be continuously excluded from the movement. Therefore, it defeats the very purpose of feminist movement to begin with, i.e. to protect all kind of women from all kinds of background. And what will our paradigm achieve? We in the other hand, is celebrating sexual liberty. We acknowledge the valid choice made by this rational women, and we think that we should include the sugar baby within the feminist movement, with the notion that we respect her choice, and we think that she is rational enough to make choices of her own. Therefore, we are never been so proud to propose.
Alright, thank you so much. Now I'd like to invite the last speaker for this debate.
Mr. Speaker, I've always wondered for a long time why prostitution was illegal. And today I finally found the answer. The answer is actually feminism. So what is feminism? Because throughout this debate, there has been a clouded definition of feminism, and government has been harping on the fact that women are submissive in society. They've been characterizing the women as a submissive person in society, and they have been harping on male dominance and etc. Well, let me tell you what is feminism and what is the movement all about as a whole before I begin with my speech. Well, feminism, like what Leonard has said, is basically the fight for equality in men and women. That means both men and women are equally given the equal rights to do whatever they want. In this motion in particular, we believe both men and women should not be sugar babies. Both men and women should not be over-dominated by a sugar daddy. Why do we say that sugar babies are over-dominated by a sugar daddy? Leonard mentioned that in his speech. What are sugar daddies? Now, sugar daddies are going to economically finance sugar babies. What does that say? Sugar daddies are why is sugar daddy? Sorry, sugar daddies are economically financing sugar babies. What does that say? That only says that sugar daddies are providing financial support to sugar babies and are hence dominant to sugar babies. Can you see where I'm drawing parallels? And one rebuttal that I have to say from closing off, she mentioned that only that politicians for some reason only take sugar babies that have high status. I do not know where this assumption comes from, because inherently what was said by opposition was that when people do not have enough money, because becoming a sugar baby in itself inherently causes an effect on your dignity, that people, when they don't have enough money, will become sugar babies in the first place, that we believe that the society which are less economically the society which are less economically stable, the poorer society, would actually contribute more to becoming sugar babies than the richer society. So I do not know where she came up with such a conclusion. Now, moving on to the debate, I have to ask the question for the motion today, and between the clashes, the question: which model supports the feminism cause better, allowing people to pay for companionship or not? Which model supports the cause of feminism better? Now, if we allow a person to pay for a relationship, like what as mentioned in opening up, first of all, opening up has not been able to define how are they going to quantify such a relationship. Is it going to be a contract relationship? What are we looking at? How can we even define beauty in the first place? So is a certain lady, and if we define beauty in the first place, isn't that a sort of discrimination which goes against feminism? If we say this woman is like say for example, this woman is too ugly to be with me, hence I pay her less. This man is too ugly, is uglier than this guy, so I pay him less. Isn't that a certain discrimination in a way? So I do not know. They haven't properly been able to quantify how they are going to define how they're going to quantify the relationship. Now moving on to a clash which I found from the opening side, from the opening side in which, from the closing side, what type of work are along the lines of feminism, right? From the closing side, we say that in companionship, definition of companionship on government versus the definition of companionship in opposition. In opposition, especially closing up, we tell you that companionship is an end as it is to a means. In a companionship, please sit down. A companionship basically is when a woman and a man meet each other and romance, and this is unquantifiable. I put it to you, Mr. Speaker. You can't quantify romance and emotional relationships. I'll take one from you.
Sir, if you are okay with other forms of paid relationship, and if you have a unified definition of what a relationship should look like, you are in effect sanctifying male and female relationship and further entrenching the gender stereotype that opening has been talking about.
I did not get that POI, so I will move on. Okay, so moving on. The objectification of a person will happen when we allow for sugar daddies or sugar babies to even exist in the first place. Because inherently, what we are doing is that when we appoint sugar babies, we are basically objectifying the sugar baby, because inherently the sugar baby becomes a sugar baby because she doesn't have any other alternative to it. The government did question what other alternatives are out there. Well, we put it to you that status quo is good enough, whereby sugar babies are illegal and prostitution, which are along the same lines as sugar babies, are also illegal. Now, and also one thing mentioned by opposition was saying that there would be a reduce in radical expression of feminism such as nudity. Well, we put it to you, side government, that there are actresses out there such as Emma Watson who are doing things with dignity, presenting speeches that support feminism, and those aren't quite as radical as you may think. So I think you haven't quite grasped. You haven't quite got the idea that there are other methods of propagating feminism out there. Now, so moving on to my clash, which I mentioned about the companionship we define in opposition versus the companionship they define in government. In the companionship we define and how the companionship supports feminism. Well, we believe that in our companionship it does not affect feminism in any way or any sort. It doesn't affect feminism, hence it doesn't cause any disrupt in the movement, and the movement is going in going in the good route now. I mean, feminism has been realized through Emma Watson speeches and through movements, and hence we believe that status quo is actually good. Feminism is actually is actually already raised awareness in public. I mean, the movements have already raised awareness in public, and we believe that by celebrating the sugar babies, it will not only decrease the movement, but it will be a kind of insult to the movement. And why we say it's an insult to the movement is because when we start allowing for such for people to pay for companionships and as such, we are basically allowing for dominance to happen between relationship, because like what Leonard mentioned in his speech, it just proves that if a person is paying for a relationship, he is more economically dominant than the other, which is a form of discrimination, and with that, we are proud to oppose. Thank you.
Alright, thank you debaters for a great debate. Please cross the floor, shake hands. And judges, I think you can just take a minute or two to reach your own conclusions, and then we'll discuss.